I can see people coming in. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give everyone just a few seconds to come in. I can see people joining. And it's time now for me to start sharing my screen. Yep. So, hello everyone and welcome to the Startup Seminar Series. I'm your host Rui, and tonight we have prepared a few announcements for you. First things first, I was just talking to Jenny, so let's see if the slide moves. There you go. First things first, the clocks went back an hour last weekend, and I hope you set the time right and made most of it. Some people were very happy with the change, and of course some others were not so much happy. And because it's Halloween, I would say it's trick or treat time. So tonight on our fourth seminar, we have the pleasure to welcome Jenny Griffiths, the founder of Snap Vision. Jenny will be telling us more about her journey and the company, as well as share with us useful insights about prototyping. So do stay tuned. One for your calendar or for your diary, do save the date, 11th of November 2020 between 2 to 4 p.m. We are hosting an event called Find a Founder. So in this event, you will have an opportunity to talk to a team of founders, as well as develop your entrepreneurial skills, network with other students, meet other founders, and work out a solution for COVID-19. So if you are a student, do stay tuned. We will soon be sharing you more details on how to register for this event. For the time being, if you want, just use your phone, scan the QR code, and find out whether you are a maker, a fixer, or a thinker. On the next slide, don't forget the usual reminder, do book an business advice session with myself or one of my colleagues, so we can discuss your idea and so you can receive some expert advice. Again, the QR code is there if you want just to use your phone to scan and then book an appointment with one of us. Don't forget again that next week we'll have Sophie Adelman, the co-founder of White Hat. Sophie, as I said, is the co-founder at White Hat. White Hat is a talent accelerator helping young people launch their career at the best companies via apprenticeships. And Sophie will be telling us more on how to create a fan base and build loyal customers. So again, the QR code is there should you wish to register. And as always, you can find more about us and what we do at city.ac.uk/City Ventures. And now it's, of course, time to put our hands together, give a round of applause, and of course, joining me in welcoming Jenny Griffiths to the virtual stage. Jenny, hello.
Hello.
Are you there? You can see me, I can see you, and I can hear you just fine. I'm stopping my screen share. How are you doing today, Jenny?
Very well, thanks. How about you?
Not bad, not bad. Rainy where you are? Because it's been quite dreadful here.
Sorry, with that?
Is it raining where you are? Is it rainy and cold?
It is rainy and cold. I'm in East London, so
East London, okay.
It's dark and cold. Getting used to the time shift.
It's not that different from South London, sadly.
Exactly.
The winter is upon us. So, Jenny, if you don't mind, I'll be, of course, introducing you. I've done a bit of research, like we were talking just a few minutes ago, but to the rest of our audience, Jenny is an award-winning technology entrepreneur and a computer vision engineer. Her company, Snap Vision, was the first in the world to offer visual search for the fashion industry. And Jenny was named by Forbes the top 50 women in technology. So, Jenny, this is rather impressive. I'm chuffed. I'm over the moon, but of course, given what you've been up to and the things that you've been developing. I do have a few questions for you, so we can get the ball rolling. So, do you want to tell us more about where you grew up? What was family life like?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks for such a lovely introduction. I always get quite embarrassed when people tell me what I've done because it's all a bit weird. I'm sure that your students out there will know when you achieve stuff, it doesn't quite register. So it's always weird hearing it. But no, I had a really kind of nice creative upbringing, I guess. So I'm from London, from South London. So I'm pleased you guys are that side of the river. And yeah, I grew up in the outskirts. My mum's a teacher, my dad's an engineer. So when I was growing up, they were always really supportive, but not particularly pushy. They were kind of those parents that wanted me to discover what I enjoyed and were very much of the opinion of like, well, you're obviously smart enough, but what do you want to do with that smartness? Because I found kind of growing up being good at science, good at technology and maths, my teachers were naturally going, oh, you should be a doctor, you should be a vet. And I was kind of going, I love animals, but I'm allergic to them. I'd be the worst vet. And
Oh,
I'd love to help people, but I'd pass out at the sight of blood. Like it's all these kind of things as I was growing up. I realized I had this kind of blend of technology, creativity. I knew that the kind of traditional tech routes wouldn't work for me, which is where I kind of started thinking about engineering as a career path. And I was lucky enough, my dad's an engineer. As soon as he heard this, I was up in the Science Museum nearly every weekend. And my kind of love of technology built out from there, I guess.
so the interests were very much around technology, science, and all of that. Any particular interest that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I got obsessed by animation, computer animation. I will always remember going to go and see, to be fair, it's one of the worst Pixar films, but A Bug's Life was like,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was riveted. And so I was probably about 8 or 9 at the time, I guess. And I was like, right, I want to be a computer animator. That's my thing. So I was really into kind of games and I didn't do any programming actually until I went to university, but that's the direction I knew I wanted to move in. And ironically, I picked my university because they had a really strong background in animation. And then when I was there, I was like, I love animation, but computer vision is actually really cool. So yeah, I guess I've always been on the kind of product tech side of things. I never thought I would ever start a business. I wasn't one of those people growing up wanting to build an empire or anything. I guess I wanted to be an inventor, and I realized that's actually a career path when you start a company. So
Funny enough, I do remember when A Bug's Life came out, and I was around the same age. So that just goes to show how old we might be. Uh, so, this is a common question that we have for our students. Is actually part of my Zoom background. So, if I'm to ask you, are you a thinker, maker, or fixer? Which one do you think you are? Or maybe a combination of the three, a fixer or.
I'm definitely a thinker and a maker. I am not a fixer. I'm one of those, when you talk about software engineering, I knew I wasn't going to be a software engineer because I'm one of those people that loves rapid prototyping, which is why I'm here today. I
Mhm.
love getting stuff just about working and then just walking away and going, someone else can optimize it. So I'm definitely I love the early stage ideas. I love coming up with terribly crazy ideas, kind of prototyping them rapidly, seeing what sticks. So that probably makes me a maker, I guess.
Okay, okay, okay. So, last question from me, and I'll leave you in the stage will be yours in a second. So, you know about prototyping, or are you telling us that you like prototyping? Tell us more how this question or how this led you to becoming the founder of Snap Vision, and the stage is now yours, Jenny.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, I guess I'll start actually with a bit of background around Snap Vision before I kind of go into my presentation, because we're not a global brand that everyone knows, but effectively what we are is we're a visual search engine for the fashion industry. So the idea started out as I was at university, all my friends suddenly had mobile phones with cameras, terrible cameras, but they were there. And I realized that the way that we were going to be able to search the world was changing completely. So we had access to content 24/7. We were all carrying these really kind of powerful sensors in our pocket, but all we'd done from a search point of view is we'd taken this massive keyboard and we just made it tiny. So we were kind of walking around the streets, typing on these tiny keyboards, bumping into lampposts. It just didn't make any sense. So that's where the idea kind of came from. So when we launched in 2012, like you said earlier, we were the first visual search engine in the world for fashion. And the idea was take a photo on your mobile or upload a photo on the web, and we'll find you similar things to buy online. So think kind of you've seen someone on the tube wearing a cool dress, take a photo and we'll show you different items. So that launched 2012. 2012, about a month later, I started getting emails from businesses, which I, to be honest, thought were fake. The biggest telco provider in Singapore said, hey, could we license this technology? And I was like, someone's just messing with me. But I basically kept getting more and more emails from other businesses going, your tech's really cool, could we leverage it in-house? So about 6 months into running the business, we pivoted, not on the product side, but on the business model side, to trying to build a marketplace where, in quite a fickle market, let's be fair, in fashion, where it's all about ad spend, and actually doing what we're good at, which is the technology and licensing that out to people. So we started collaborating with companies like Singtel in Singapore, Westfield, Time Inc., and kind of, you can imagine the AI market back then was really nascent. So it was a lot of kind of market education, finding people within organizations willing to take the risk to kind of adopt new tech. So that was kind of one-off innovation products where we were reaching product market fit, doing a lot of prototyping hand in hand with customers. And now where we're at as a business is we've taken all of that technology, put it into a bundle, and now we're selling it at scale. So we're more in that kind of traditional SaaS market, which is a completely different type of business, but really, really good fun.
Fantastic. Jenny, the stage is now yours. I'll just tell the rest, well, our attendees, that if you have any questions for Jenny to answer, to use the Q&A function, we'll be answering them towards the end. So Jenny, thank you once again. I'll see you on the other side of the presentation.
Brilliant, thank you. So I will share my screen, press play. Obviously shout if you can't see it, but yeah, so lovely to meet all of you, and please let the questions flood in. They can be as weird as wonderful as you like, so do go for it, don't hold back. And yeah, I'm here today to talk about something I'm really passionate about, which is how to develop your first prototype. I'm not sure what stage you're all at, but prototyping, no matter how old or how young the business is always one of the most important things you can be doing. So things that we'll cover today, what's a prototype and why should you prototype, which is probably the biggest question. I'll take you through some examples of good ones that are kind of out there at the moment, which I really respect. We'll then drop down into the methodology behind kind of what approach do you want to take, because prototypes obviously cover a whole gambit of different things depending on what industry you're in. And then we'll kind of take a step back and look at the past and how I prototyped, how I tested each stage at the beginning. And if we've got a bit of time left, I can kind of jump into actually what do I do nowadays to prototype and how has that changed over time. And then the final bit is just some kind of practical takeaways of if you want to have a go yourself, here are some really good tools in the market that you can use at the moment. So try and make it practical and something that you can kind of play around with after this session. So a lovely cliche way to start a presentation, but the dictionary definition of a prototype is pretty simple, to be honest. It's basically a first version of a device or a vehicle from which other forms are developed. So it's basically the first thing that you do to bring an idea to life, which is quite a plain way of looking at a prototype. The way that I like to look at it with my kind of startup hat on is it's the cheapest, lowest cost, lowest stress way of possibly sense checking your ideas. So you should be stripping it back and back and back until you kind of reach this really kind of slightly shoddy, slightly rough and ready version of a minimum viable product. So you're not looking for that MVP that you can kind of take everywhere, but you're looking for basically a vessel to sense check your own ideas. So it can be scrappy, it can be faked. The main thing is to make it in an easily shareable format. So you're not just rattling around in your own brain. You can actually sense check them with potential customers, potential clients, people that you trust, that you can get live feedback from before you kind of launch into build mode and start spending lots of time and spending lots of money. So yeah, lowest cost way is what we're going to be talking about quite a lot today. So a few examples of what prototypes look like in the real world. And this is where I said lowest cost, a bit tongue in cheek, because obviously it completely depends on what industry you're in and what you want to get out of the prototype. So you've got some computer-aided design prototypes that happen quite a lot. So the ones that always spring to mind for me are concept cars. And there's a very cool one actually that hit Twitter, I think, earlier on this week from Fiat around, hey, if we made this all this all electric version of a really kind of cool old Fiat, would you guys be interested? Then it begins to go viral and they kind of know that that's something that they should begin to look into more. So it's how realistic do you want to make this to be able to show it to people to get that kind of reaction that you'd like to see with the actual product. You've then got these kind of high quality physical prototypes. This is a very extreme version, but this is something you can kind of roll out to impress people. And we'll talk about the reasons as to why you might want to do this kind of prototyping further down the road. You've got your low quality physical prototypes. So could you 3D print something to make it feel real enough and kind of see how it feels in your hand, see once again if it gets that reaction, and do this at quite a low cost. You've got concept art. Quite a lot of my friends are software developers, given my background, and a fair few of them make things like video games in their spare time. So this is actually a way of kind of sounding out your target audience, seeing if it will resonate well with them before actually developing. And this is obviously a kind of bit of a classic, this one. You get into the realms of what I really enjoy, which is hand-drawn wireframes. So this is when you're designing a whole user experience right from the very beginning. So if it's a website, if it's a mobile app, how can you kind of lay out that journey in a way that you kind of move things around before you set it in stone and get a sense of what everything will look like, what everything will feel like, and how information is kind of flowing through the system. Honestly, you can't beat Post-it notes for this kind of thing, and it's very good fun to have a crack at. You've got interactive wireframes, which is once you've kind of got that flow nailed down, I guess, in Post-it notes in my case, there is software out there, and we'll talk about it a bit later, where you can actually mock that journey so that actually what you end up with is something that feels like an app, that looks like an app, where you can tap on buttons, it will take you to different pages, but actually you fake the whole thing. And that's something you can put into the hands of a potential user, and you can obviously do the same with other digital experiences like websites as well. So it's kind of like a high fidelity style wireframe that you're able to create in software. And then you get to full code prototyping, which is costly, expensive sometimes, takes a lot of time, but this is really, really great if you actually need to validate something on the cutting edge. So prototyping doesn't always need to be kind of shoddy. You've got the full code prototypes, you've got the kind of full physical prototypes, but it's all around understanding the reasons to why you're doing it and working out how far you need to push a prototype to really get that information that you need from it, rather than building a whole thing when you don't necessarily need to at that point in time. So, like I said, the approach that you want to take really depends on the why. And we'll talk about how you define that kind of question in a moment. I will also admit it also depends on your time and budget. If I had an idea for an amazing concept car that BMW should buy, I definitely wouldn't be able to do a full prototype of it. So it's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's worth, obviously, you've got to keep in the back of your mind what you can afford to do and how long you've got. But try and kind of take yourself out of your personal constraints. Put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're trying to convince with this prototype, even if it's yourself, and then that will be kind of more informative as to the approach that you want to take. So if you take a step back to this kind of why are you prototyping, why are you doing this, you kind of need to take yourself out of your own mind and really kind of reframe your challenge a bit. And once again, ask yourself that question really objectively of how can you get the answers that you need as cheaply as possible. And that kind of, the answers that you need is probably the main thing that you've really got to be considering here. So the answers you need depend on what stage of the journey that you're at. So are you about to raise money and you need to talk to investors and you need to show them something? Are you considering quitting your job and you need to kind of have that point in your life where you know that you're committing to something that is worth sacrificing your salary for? Or are you trying to get your first client so that you can kind of bootstrap this yourself and then you know that you've got something valuable and then X, Y, and Z? So you've got to kind of really work out what are the milestones that will drive value in your business, that will let you give up your job, let you become a full-time entrepreneur, let you raise money, however you want to build your business. You need to kind of have a clear roadmap as to how you see your business growing, and then that will inform the type of prototyping that you're doing. So obviously at the very beginning, it means it's scrappy, it's cheap, it's a way of letting you kind of get out of your own head and kind of really put these ideas down on paper. At a later stage, so in my case, we've got investment, we've got a team, we know that the core idea is there, but we're taking it into new products. It's a very different type of prototyping. So the approaches that you take and that you enjoy will kind of evolve over time. But it's always just a case of taking a step back and kind of asking, why am I doing this? Why do I need a prototype? And sorry if I'm sounding a bit like a broken record on that one, just hearing myself. So to kind of look at the prototypes we talked about earlier, and I'm more than happy to share these slides afterwards, by the way, so don't worry about frantically scribbling notes when I've written too much on a slide. But coming up to that kind of first one of the computer-aided design prototype, you are basically discovering how a design resonates with the target customer. You're seeing how viral this goes. You are able to share on Twitter, see people's reactions. And then also internally, you're using it to kind of sound out your stakeholders, get quotations from manufacturers, really build out a kind of cost profile on this so you can calculate the ROI. So when you're creating kind of a high fidelity digital prototype of something, it's there to be shared, and that informs the quality that you have to go into. That is kind of in line with this high quality prototype that we talked about. So this version of an electric car, for instance, that's there on a big podium, people are talking about it. It's there to drive press, it's there to make noise, it's basically hype, but also it could be convincing investors to invest. So Tesla is a great example of this, of kind of building these high quality fidelity prototypes of those kind of armored vehicles and seeing how that affects share price. How can we get investors more interested? So there's a lot of kind of, I guess, showboating in a way in these kind of high quality prototypes. Coming back to probably where we're all sitting in the world, you've got these kind of lower quality physical prototypes, which is really about, and the rest of these are actually about how this resonates with your target customer, whether it's a direct sale that you're trying to make, it's B2B, if it's B2C, who are your target customers, how can you get in front of them, and how can you get that feedback before you go too far down a route that you may not want to go down, or actually when you realize that you're really onto something and you want to double down on it, you've got that answer very, very quickly at the beginning of that journey. Obviously, what we were doing as well was convincing investors to invest. It's kind of how far down the product line do you need to go if you need to raise investments to be able to convince people that this is an idea that's worth backing, you're an entrepreneur that's worth backing, and then you need the team to kind of make that become a reality. And I'll obviously kind of talk about that later on for my own kind of personal experiences. Concept art is all about that right creative direction. It's kind of getting that feel for yourself of, is this how I want my product to look and feel? We went through about 4 or 5 branding exercises actually, with kind of putting everything down into kind of mocked up app and seeing, right, actually those colors don't work, that typeface doesn't work, why don't we bring in more imagery? So there's a lot to be said around mocking up what the actual end look and feel will be like, even if it's just for internal purposes rather than kind of sharing it with the real world. Hand-drawn wireframes, I will always stand by. It's checking logic and flow. It's a great way of communicating with your team as well. I'm not sure about you, but whenever I've got an idea, I'm so excited that I can't really get it out of my head in a way that actually makes sense to anyone else. So hand-drawn wireframes are a really, really great way of just kind of mapping out a flow, getting everyone collaborating, changing things around before they're set in stone, and really kind of easing that communication, getting ideas flowing as a team rather than just being trapped in your own head and kind of getting too excited before you have an outlet. Same goes for interactive wireframes. I tend to do this kind of a week after I've done the physical wireframing. It kind of lets it sit. It kind of lets me tweak things a little bit before I then kind of set it down in software and really kind of begin to play with it. And then you've got your full coded prototypes. There's a benefit to doing this, I think I mentioned earlier, if you're really, really trying to push the boundaries of, is something possible? Very cliched example springs to mind, which isn't to do with code, but it's like Theranos, right? They had this amazing idea to test for diseases with a single drop of blood. They definitely went too far without prototyping and ended up selling this dream of something that was completely unrealistic. So if you are selling a dream, in my case, it was visual search, be able to take a photo of anything with your camera and find similar. to really, really stand behind that, you need to know that it works. And that's when you begin to kind of build that tribe around you of supporters, convince people to leave their jobs, join your company, convince people to invest in you. You need to kind of know if you're doing something really cutting edge that you can do it. So there is something to be said for how far do you want to take your prototypes to make sure that you're selling something that exists. So on that note, I'll take you through kind of where we started at. So this is the bit of the journey, I guess, from having my idea at university to creating that minimum viable product, which required investment. It was it was a 2-year period of my life actually, where I was kind of rapid prototyping. So I'll walk you through that right now. And the product, by the way, I know I talked about a few products at the beginning. This was around the mobile app. So being able to take a photo of anything, upload it to the mobile app and find similar items. Similarly with the web, being able to take a photo, upload it to a website, etc., etc. So it was this kind of B2C, direct consumer facing thing that I was prototyping at the time. So talking about selling a dream, I started with code. So it's a bit of a niche way to start. I'll give you that, and I'll happily kind of talk about this later on in Q&A if anyone wants to delve a bit deeper. But I was really concerned that my idea wouldn't work. So I came up with the idea 2007, 2008. At the time, there was a company called Like.com based in America, and they were beginning to look at visual search, and they got acquired by Google actually in 2009. But where they had constrained their problem, and in computer vision you need quite a lot of constraints, was they were looking at images that were only on a white background, that were only a certain type of photography, that were only on web, so there was no user upload. So the big high risk bit to my project was you need to be able to take a photo of anything. It could be someone with their mobile phone taking a photo of a dog and you need to know it's wrong. It could be someone taking a photo in a club and wondering why you can't get the right color out. Believe it or not, I've had this conversation a number of times of if the human eye can't see it, then how on earth will a computer be able to work it out? So all of these kind of human generated problems where they were feeding into the algorithms, and you don't want to justify why something isn't working. It needs to work. So that's why I started at code. So when I look at prototyping, I ask myself 3 questions just to explain what's on the screen right now. You've got, why am I doing it? How long will it take me? How much will it cost me? And what's the answer that I really, really want to get out of this? So dropping into code, my why was I need to prove to myself before I take this any further that my idea is physically possible. How long it took me, I was very lucky. I actually did this as my master's thesis at university. So it took me about 9 months of coding. It was time I would have spent anyway. So it had kind of 0 cost to me, and it also had no external costs. So I was very lucky in the sense that I could rapid prototype myself. Geeked out for 9 months of my life, got really into C++, and came out with something that was actually useful. And the answer that I got was, actually, this is physically possible. There's a lot of holes in it at the moment. It's very much an academic project, written a thesis on it. I've verified it with my friends that they want to use it. And it kind of gave me this, it's possible. I know that I can now talk about this externally. I feel comfortable talking to people about this idea and know that I'm not kind of lying basically about this thing that may be possible. And I've shown it to a few people already that I know will love it. So it was kind of that first step of, what you guys really want to do is talk about it to your friends, if they're the target market, see if they want to consume it. People are always worried about showing things at this really early stage, but actually the whole point of prototyping is get your ideas out there. Business, it's all in the execution. It's not all in the idea. So don't worry about kind of putting yourself in a room wearing a tinfoil hat, not sharing your ideas. No one's really going to steal them, and they won't do it as well as you did if they are the kind of person who steals ideas. So don't worry too much about that. So after I'd done that, I'd kind of convinced myself that this was something that I wanted to do. I hadn't convinced myself enough. So I graduated at this point. I had 3 career options. I had a PhD offer in the computer science department. I had a job as a project manager at an engineering company, a job offer. And then I had this business. And my background, I know we talked about today, is my dad's an engineer, my mum's a teacher. No one in my family had ever started a business. It seemed very high risk, massive recession. I was like, right, I'll take the job, but I'm going to promise myself in my evenings and weekends, I'm going to work on this business. So that kind of informed my why and my how long and how cost framing questions. I didn't have a lot of money to spend. I didn't have a lot of time. It was basically a hobby, and I needed to know my big why was, should I take this further than a hobby? Should this be my career path? And is this the path I want to take in life? So those kind of big decisions that are going through your head after you graduate. So to put it a bit more formally, my why was I really needed to truly understand what this product looked like before I commit to designing it fully. I needed it to take a few days. It cost me nothing. So this was me basically looking like a crazy person in my flat, getting a whiteboard, drawing loads of things, putting up a load of Post-it notes, really, really wireframing it. And the answer that I got was I spent a few days doing a few iteration. I had a flow that worked for web and for mobile. And I'd actually convinced myself enough at this point that I knew the core tech worked. I knew that the flow was right. I'd looked at the way that fashion apps were working. And now I knew that I had to build it. So what this looked like, and this is actually really important, prototype as fast as you possibly can. Don't worry about making it pretty. Like you can see there, that is the worst t-shirt that has ever been drawn in the history of mankind. It's all about how you can let your ideas flow as quickly as possible. So don't think that anyone's ever going to see these. Don't worry about making them look good at all. Just try and use it as an outlet to get your thoughts down as quickly as possible. This was my first one. I soon realized that your outlet for getting thoughts down as fast as possible means that everything's in the wrong order. So that's why having a whiteboard, having an iPad, having Post-it notes is the best way definitely to paper prototype. Then I moved on to dynamic wireframing. So this was around that kind of process that I showed you earlier, which is using software basically to map out the flow without having to write any code. So this is actually a really good way of effectively looking like you've coded. Some people don't know how to code. If there's anyone on there who's kind of got an app idea but has that kind of barrier around having to write the code themselves. So really, really good tools to use to kind of sense check those ideas. So my why here was I need to make this easy to articulate the user journey. I look like a crazy person. I have Post-it notes all over my flat. If I'm going to tell people about this idea, I need to be able to kind of convince them and get good feedback from people based on something that's a bit more physical than having little scraps of paper everywhere. It cost me about a week to build it. So once again, week of my spare time. These apps are priced. Back in the day, there was a really, really good one called Prototyping on Paper, which I don't believe exists anymore, but I'll share some recommendations at the end of this talk. And what I got out of that again was I was able to put this into the hands of my friends. You can share them all by email as well, which is pretty useful. And I actually used that to inform feedback for the design team, because that was the step I knew I had to take next. Was I'm good at coding, I'm good at user flows, I can't design anything. So I knew that my next cost was coming. So this was partially convincing myself that it was right to spend the money, but it was also kind of getting a tool that would be good to feed into a designer, once again, able to articulate. So this stage of prototyping, just to take a step back, is around kind of getting your self-belief up, making sure that your idea is right. You can always walk away from a prototype, and you should walk away from them and not feel like you're failing. That's the whole point. They're low fidelity, you throw them out the window, you start again. And then it's also something you can actually take to other people to ease communication, so that when you begin to involve other people in your kind of crazy ideas, they're able to understand them, and it kind of gets rid of a lot of the friction that you have when you actually go for the main build. So I don't have my old examples. Prototyping on paper is very much dead, sadly, so I can't find my old ones, but this is the kind of thing that you can expect. So you can create buttons where it kind of takes you through to a new screen. So you can pick the devices that you want to mock up. So like I say, I'll make some recommendations at the end of this. And then I started spending real money on this. So designs were the next step. The reason that I had to involve a designer at quite an early stage was my target market. So I was marketing this at kind of 16 to 25-year-old females who were really into fashion, and showing people scraps of paper and kind of wireframes, it just wasn't cutting the mustard. So I was getting kind of relatively positive feedback, but quite a lot of noise in that feedback around, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it was purple, or wouldn't it be cool if it looked like this app? So it was very hard to pick out the useful feedback from the kind of noise around design. So it's the fashion market, really depends what industry you're going into, but it's worth kind of acknowledging when you're not getting what you need out of the process and working out what it is that you can throw into it to make sure that you're kind of eliminating that noise that you don't need at this stage. So that was why we did it. At this point, it probably took a designer a couple of weeks. We did a first iteration. We ended up kind of doing 4 or 5. So once again, they were doing quite rapid prototyping themselves, not doing the full designs, getting my opinions on serif versus sans serif and color palettes and layouts. And this was the first external cost that I incurred kind of as an entrepreneur. But the answer that I got, so I took these designs back to the user groups that I was doing. I was doing fortnightly user groups, by the way, which I can't recommend enough. It just kind of keeps you honest and make sure you're not designing a product just for you. But I found that the positive feedback in those user groups absolutely soared. I got rid of that noise in the feedback process because people were less distracted by the fact it looked ugly. And then I realized at that point, if this is the reaction that I'm getting from my target base, this is where I actually need to make those big life choices around, do I want to do my day job? Do I give it up? If I'm going to give it up, how do I fund this? How do I get more people into the team? So that was where I really kind of started bringing in my kind of business plan thinking alongside the prototyping to make sure that I could deliver on the kind of dream that I had. So this is what Snap looked like. Welcome to the wonderful world of kind of 2010 designing. It's very old school now I look at it, but that's kind of how this whole journey started. And then we got into the full code type prototype of that first product. So for me, I needed to raise investment to hire more people. I couldn't do that without a full coded prototype. So I took the code that I did on the back end around proving that basically it would work. I then prototyped mobile apps, so basically strapped an interface onto the front end with a database, taking in real data. And then I was able to, within a month, kind of have something that I could put physically into the hand of an investor because I knew that I needed to raise money and kind of say, look, this is the back end, this is what it can do. This is just me working with the designer. If you back us, this is what we can build you. And this is the kind of vision of the company. So it was very much a way of kind of bringing it to life and making sure that was a requirement for an investor to know that this technology would work in a way that a user would then interact with it. So it only took me about a month to prototype this. The code never saw the light of day. Once again, there's absolutely no shame in writing terrible code or doing a terrible design just to kind of get you somewhere and knowing that you can throw it away. So back again to not wanting to throw things away. Needless to say, it actually took me a lot longer to raise investment. So this is probably a question for later on if any of you guys are thinking about doing it, but it took me about a year in the end to raise the capital off the back of this kind of prototype. So there are definitely things I do differently the second time round. And then after that, that's kind of all of my rapid prototyping out of the way. We were then working towards an MVP. So I found an external app agency. Those prototypes were actually very useful because I was able to give them those kind of user flows. This is how I see it working. This is the design vibe that we want. This is actually something that I built. Obviously, the code's not up to scratch, but this is kind of where we want it to go. And it meant that it was pretty easy, to be honest, to find an app agency that were able to take my ideas. And also, I have to say, it brought down the price of that app agency because they knew that they were dealing with someone who had kind of thought out this vision and was going to be kind of good to work with. So there's a bit around making communication easier, and then actually good prototyping can save you a lot of money down the road. It meant as well that I was able to increase our full stack team. So I was able to make hires. We carried on running our fortnightly user groups. It's still something we try and do, obviously, when there's not COVID, but to really, really make sure that we're getting that user impact and making sure that the product kind of stays on the straight and narrow, that it doesn't become kind of my pet project again. And then we obviously built it out into a suite of products. So went mobile, went web, blah, blah, blah. So from thinking about the idea at university, took about a year to get that full code prototype, and then probably another year to give up my day job, raise the capital. So it's a relatively slow progress at the beginning, and may not be the way that you guys want to go, but it certainly was a way of kind of doing it as a first-time founder without a track record. It was a kind of nice way of proving that I had the intellect and the skills, etc., everything that an investor's looking for to be able to actually do this for the first time. So talking a bit about tools now, but you really, really don't need fancy tools to prototype. Goes without saying, So the tools that I used, step one was all C++ code. So it's basically the cost of my computer, which everyone has anyway. Step two was paper wireframes, post-it notes. Get yourself a nice notebook. Don't work on scraps of paper. I always advocate nice notebooks. Step three, dynamic wireframes. I used a piece of software called Pop. Step four was Photoshop and InDesign, and then step five was PHP, MySQL, Swift, which was Objective-C kind of back in the day. So it was back into coding at that point. So obviously everything that I used, I did this in 2010. Most of it's completely outdated. So I'll talk about some tools that you can use today. So we talked a bit earlier around drawing tools and basically how you can get your ideas out as quickly as possible onto paper, so you're kind of not overthinking everything, you're just kind of letting the ideas flow. I actually bought myself a load of stencils. I know that sounds really, really dumb, but it was basically a really quick way of just putting something on a paper, getting the right size box, making sure that I wasn't getting distracted by my own bad drawing. I need a Wi-Fi symbol, just kind of stencil over it. So it seems like a really frivolous thing to recommend, but actually it just kind of took that friction out of wireframing. And the same, actually, you can get little notebooks with everything pre-drawn in. So you can get kind of comic strips, you can get mobile apps and web pages as well. Once again, depends on what you're creating, but if you are going the software route, it kind of takes a bit of friction out of having to worry about that kind of thing. Interactive wireframing, I'm very sad that Pop has gone, but there are some really, really good tools out there at the moment. So Adobe XD is free for personal use. Personal use is pretty limited. At that point, you're into the £10 a month kind of territory, which, believe it or not, is on the cheaper side for these kind of tools. But it's a drop in the ocean when it comes to starting a company, so it is worth doing it. And that screenshot is actually of Adobe. There's another one as well, which is more independent, which is called Wireframe. It's a bit better for rapid prototyping in the sense that you don't have to design up elements. They've basically got drag and drop elements where you can just kind of say, hey, I need a text entry box, and they've kind of pre-designed it for you, and it just drops in quite nicely. It's a bit more expensive, but once again, it's a monthly plan, so you could just use it for a month and then kind of drop it relatively quickly. And then Balsamic, I believe, is free. Oh no, just check. No, it's £9 a month. It feels like you're hand drawing Balsamic, so I'm not as big a fan, but it's cheaper, it's more rapid. Once again, it's just drag and drop elements, so personal style, but these are the three that I kind of get on the best with. Mocking up designs, you've got Photoshop, obviously £20 a month. The free version of Photoshop is called GIMP. It's just as easily usable, so I recommend that quite highly. And then when you get into CAD, I was always using Maya, which is a horrible paid version. It's quite expensive, but Blender, once again, lets you prototype 3D models for CAD relatively easily. And it's quite a fun bit of software, to be honest, to get your head around if you need to do that kind of more physical design side of things. And then finally, I was just going to leave you, I'm aware that I don't want to overrun too much because I want to answer your questions, but don't be afraid to write off an idea. I've told you a nice success story of an idea I had at university that's now a business. I've had some dreadful ones. I think my worst one was we were going to launch a product called Snap Body Shape, where you take a photo of yourself wearing kind of fitted jeans and a fitted top, and it would tell you what body shape you are and recommend clothing for that. And honestly, the reason that we didn't pursue it was I took a prototype to my mum. I took a photo of her and it said, "You're an apple," which for one wasn't accurate, but two, that is not a nice thing to tell anyone. So that's kind of a nice example of taking a prototype to a target customer and realizing it's just not a good idea. And then also keep the faith. This was a nice tweet that went viral last week from ASOS, but it was just a kind of nice how it looked back in the day versus how it looks now. So you will probably feel like everything's a bit scrappy when you're prototyping and when you're doing your MVP, but honestly, if you stick with it, iterate over time, you will have the best fun. To me, this is the most exciting bit of starting a business. So I'm kind of jealous of you guys starting up new stuff and can't wait to see what you build. So that's everything from me. Really looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Jenny.
No worries.
I'm still getting my head around the idea that you built something that called your mother an apple.
Yeah, it's a body shape. It wasn't a good. And then I actually replaced it with, so you have like apple shape, hourglass shape, rectangle, etc. And I was like, maybe it'd be better if I mapped her to a celebrity instead, because then it's a bit more flattering. So you're a Scarlett Johansson or a. So then I told my mum that she was a Miley Cyrus, and I was just like, no, this idea is not good.
Okay.
So
Maybe it
you
was
learn.
the end result that was telling that maybe this is not an idea to pursue.
Yeah.
I can see that we have questions coming in, and please keep firing them. I'm just going to kick off, and I think this is actually someone else's question as well. Uh, Slightly related, or maybe not. I was watching an episode yesterday on Chrysler's head of design, where he was saying that a good prototype of a car, in this case, only has three lines, and from those three lines you should be able to understand what is the basic concepts of that car is coming to be. So my question really is how do you know that prototype is ready as a prototype?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's kind of a feeling, which is the most annoying answer that I could possibly give, I think. But it, I think it's what feels like you've done enough to be able to kind of answer that question around why and how, and is this going to get me the answers that I need to get, but not feeling like you're procrastinating and kind of perfecting something, I guess. Where I know that I'm overdoing a prototype is when I start getting really into things that I'm not particularly good at. So design, if I start playing around with design and going like, oh, I wonder what it would look like in this color and etc. etc. I'm like, I'm out of my comfort zone. I know that I'm not adding to this. So I know that I've kind of taken this prototype a bit too far. So yeah, I guess it's kind of watching yourself for these things that you keep tweaking and kind of sense checking. Do you actually need to do that to get the answer that you need, and kind of reining yourself in a bit?
Makes sense. Is along the lines of more is less.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Less is more. I share.
And the worst thing that can happen if you're showing it to someone and they go, I don't understand, you take it back and you add to it. That's how you really know. So there's nothing really bad that can come out of it.
On the same note, and this is a question from Shurum. Hello, Shurum, and thank you for your question. How did investors respond initially to the prototype, or rather the first time you reached one of them?
Yeah, so I approached investors way too early. Don't recommend doing that. So I started talking to investors probably straight out of uni. So I won the university's business plan competition, which was lovely because it gave me quite a lot of capital for a student. I won £15,000 to kind of prototype my idea and give up my job. So I was very lucky in that sense. But because I'd won that money, I thought, right, I need to raise more money. So I went just with my thesis basically to initial investors at the beginning. And they basically went, come back when you've got a product, which is completely fair. So I think a bit of the art of showing prototypes to investors is going in confidently, knowing your business plan, obviously, but also going in when you feel that capital is the only thing that's constraining you as an entrepreneur. So you know the market, you know the product, you know where you want to take it. It's just you can't take it there because you don't have the skill set to do that yourself. And I think that's when you know that your prototype is ready and that you're investor ready. It's when you've got that sense of like frustration of I can't do this by myself. And then at that point, you probably got enough under your belt to be able to communicate it well to investors, and your prototype will be at a stage where it does convince them. Um, yeah, so in my sense, having that code working was really important, and having that mobile app that you could put into someone's hand and go, look, I know what I'm doing, I can design a product. That was the main barrier. For other people, it might be the first paying customer. It really, really depends on your business and kind of proving that you need an investor. You don't just want to own a company that has investment, I guess.
Still on the same notes, and still talking about investment and fundraising, a question from Annelore, and thank you, Annelore, for your question. Uh, she's obviously saying thank you for your journey. Keen to hear more about fundraising aspects, and particularly what would you have done differently in hindsight and why?
So I'm aware this is being recorded, but it's funny. So I did Seed Camp in 2011. Seed Camp's awesome, by the way. You should definitely look at it if you're thinking about fundraising, because they're really supportive of kind of first-time startup founders. So that's my first regret, actually, is the career path I took straight after graduation. Was I worked for an awesome company. I had an awesome time, but I didn't work for a company that investors knew. So I wasn't able to go, I'm a software engineer who worked for Google, or I worked for Facebook, or I worked for kind of a backable company. I worked for a French defense engineering company. It was very cool. I had a great time, but it didn't really play to what a venture capitalist is looking for. So I guess if I was doing it again and I had been mindful of that, I probably would have made a slightly different career choice at the beginning if I knew that I wanted to do startups afterwards. So I would have worked for a Google, or I would have worked for a startup and kind of learned on the job and done that side of things. I think my next regret was I pretended I had a co-founder because I thought that you couldn't start a company by yourself. So this is where I was kind of hesitating telling this story because it's recorded, but I genuinely took my sister to Seed Camp and she didn't say anything because it was my business. And I actually met Carlos from Seed Camp the other year. He's like, "You're one of the coldest founders I've ever met. You dropped your sister like a stone." And I was like, "No, she wasn't a co-founder, like whatever." So I think that kind of mistake at the beginning, to make it a bit more general, was trying to present a view of what I thought investors wanted that wasn't authentic. Like, I'm a sole founder, I prototyped it. I thought that was weird. I was trying to kind of project what I think they'd want to see. So yeah, that's probably what I changed at the beginning, and just going out to market too soon. Like I say, speak to investors when you need investors. I think there's a lot wrong with startup worlds in the sense of you're seen as a big success the more money you raise, the more successful you are. But actually, that's not a definition of success. It's a definition of speaking to lots of investors and giving up quite a lot of your company. So try and keep going as long as you can before taking external investment.
It doesn't relate, yeah. So a question now from Sam. What were if there were any points where you disregarded any negative feedback from a feature from people that you've been interviewing or a user group, and you just trusted your instincts, and
Yeah.
did it work out in the end? Because it's quite a dilemma that I think that people face when they're building either a product or a service.
Yeah, it's true. Ultimately, you're the founder and you've had the vision, especially if you're doing something that hasn't been done before. You really, really need to back your gut instincts, because I was having this conversation with my board the other day. No one knows if they're right or wrong in a startup. It's terrifying, but it's thrilling at the same time. Literally, it's never been done before. You don't have the benefit of hindsight. You can't learn from other people, so you've got to back your gut. So I tend to kind of, when I run a user group, I try not to be in there, or I try not to talk that much. I try and get someone else to run it for me, because if I feel strongly about something, I try and phrase questions in a way that lead people to the answer, it's human nature. So I'd say when you're trying to get objective feedback where you really want to learn, try and be an observer, don't be the person leading it. And then it lets you kind of absorb that information slower time and decide if it's information that you want to discount or not. Because it might be that your gut feel is something you're going to go with and you kind of need to hear it, but you decide whether, in the context of other people, of other things that they're saying, whether that is a good person to be taking feedback on, what their life views are, is that what your kind of overall target market is. So you kind of have to build that into it. So it's good if you don't jump straight away and kind of go, whoa, that's not where I want to go. And then the thing is, if you're going with your gut instinct, but everyone keeps saying it, that's when you know you've got to listen. So in my example, the pivot that we did with B2C, I was like, we're going to change the world. We're going to be the biggest online marketplace. We're going to have the best product discoverability. ASOS, no one will shop at ASOS when they can shop with us. And then it took 5, 6, 7 companies coming to me going, we want to license software, for me to actually go, maybe my initial business model isn't the business model for us. So there are loads of different things you can play with based on feedback, but I'd say decide whether the source of feedback is informed enough and your target market enough. And then if it keeps happening, you've got to listen.
Okay. I think this is something related to this answer to the question that we've been answering. You mentioned that your original product or your original business model was B2C, and at which point did you realize that B2B was better for Snapvision, and how did you come gathering your customers? How did you
Yeah.
approach them? Did you approach them, in fact, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so I realized when we started getting inbound emails, so Singtel actually in Singapore was the first one that we got. They approached me 3 times before I replied, which is probably the worst business mistake I've ever made, but they forgave me. But I just didn't see it as relevant. So I kind of had my blinkers on building a B2C brand. I was like, a company in a country that I'm not in, that I don't know anything about, the market. I was just, yeah, I very much had my blinkers on. So that is an example of having enough emails hit my inbox that you actually listen, coming back to not discarding feedback. So yeah, I'd say that was probably the company that changed it for me, because I realized that it was this huge global company. He has a lot of money to invest. He has a great tech team who kind of sat up and gone, you guys have done something that we haven't done and that we've tried to do and we haven't been able to do it. So this is interesting. So that kind of gave me the confidence to run B2B and B2C in parallel. So I was like, right, let's give this a go. Let's see which one wins out. I don't know. None of my investors know. Let's just go for it. And I'm still torn today on whether that was the right decision or not. Speak about things we do differently. It's very hard to run a company where you've got a lot of stuff going on, because the mantra is kind of do one thing, do it well. We've done that from a tech point of view. We didn't do that from a business model point of view. So jury's still out on that one, on whether we were too slow to move into B2B. But yeah, and when it comes to approaching customers, because we were so early into the visual search market, I did quite a lot of public speaking to get awareness of what we do. You can imagine at the time talking about AI in fashion, it's very much kind of what is AI, what is computer vision, why is AI not evil, that kind of market education piece. And doing that in a public speaking forum was kind of bringing people to me who had the vision to want to try it themselves. So that was our best lead generation tool by a long way. And then it's all about, once again, we're doing something really early, finding an advocate within a company who's willing to take a risk on you. One thing that I don't think that we appreciate enough as entrepreneurs is putting your neck on a line in a corporate is really scary, and kind of saying, hey, I met this person at an event and she's quite young and she's got this new company, but I want to make this career move where I'm going to put her. And it's a big thing for someone to do in a corporate, and it's very easy to forget that when you're running a small business. So it's about just spending the time getting to know people, getting to convince them that you're not a raving lunatic, that what you're designing is good, and then kind of building that rapport and getting those kind of early customer testimonials, and then it grows from there.
Okay, and I'm liking how the questions are getting all related. So the next question is, what if I don't know coding? Coding, yeah. Should I
Yeah.
hire someone with a salary, or should I just give them equity share? What if they take the idea and the coding and start on their own?
Yeah, it's a tough one. So I'd say, talking specifically about prototyping, you don't need to code to do a prototype. The only reason I did need to do it was because it was like this huge computer vision project, and would it work, would it not, etc., etc. When you're building something like an app or a service or a website where the technology isn't the be all and end all, you're not a deep tech company, you don't need to code it. So I'd say do the interactive wireframes are enough to get that feedback, to be able to get the flow, to be able to communicate your ideas well. And that way it will give you the time to work out what's defensible about your idea and what you don't want to tell people. So for me, I will never tell anyone about how the software works, but I will happily talk about clients and engagement and blah, 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 but I'd never give them the secret sauce. So if you go through that prototyping yourself, kind of wireframing it, you will work out what your secret sauce is and what someone else might not think of and what you don't want to tell someone else if you are worried. And then I think when it comes to finding a developer, I don't know. I mean, I used to get approached a lot by business people who were like, hey, I've got this cool idea. Could you build it for me? You can either go the find a co-founder route and kind of make sure they're committed from the beginning, but you want to know them for a while. Obviously, If you're going to do shares, one thing I wish I knew at the beginning, do vesting periods on shares. So if you kind of get someone involved and you realize they're not the right person for you and it's not working out, it's not a kind of messy divorce with a load of shares. It's kind of they've earned what they've earned. You let them keep them and then they can walk away. So I'd say vesting periods are really, really important if you are going the share route. But I always look at shares as they're more valuable than money if you believe in what you're building. So it's that kind of, do you have a pot of personal money? So the way I did it was I obviously won that prize. So I was incredibly privileged to have a pot of personal money to be able to spend on it. But I promised myself I'm going to spend 5 grand. And when that pot's gone, it's gone. So if I can't make it work within that amount of money that I have, that's it. I learned a lot. I can write about it on my CV. It was great. So I think if you are going to begin to spend actual real money on it, set yourself a really clear line at the beginning of something that you don't want to cross, because starting a company is a bit like gambling. It's like, just one more. If I just do one more thing with this designer, we might get there. So I think if you are going to start paying people, just kind of know where your limits are and make sure you don't put yourself in a position where you're kind of overcommitted, because that's easy to do.
Makes total sense. Now, a question from Ghana, and Ghana is saying, of course, so excited to hear more about your journey and your business, Jenny. She's actually saying holding your first prototype must be one of the most exciting moments in your business.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
in your case, Jenny, what was the most important part of your whole business journey so far?
Ooh, great question. You know what? That first code prototype, it sounds really cheesy, but that kind of eureka moment of, oh my God, I've just uploaded a photo and it actually works. I was the laughing stock of my course at points in a friendly way, but there were about 120 people on my course. I was one of 4 girls, and I was doing a fashion search website. So, it's a bit of a butt of jokes anyway. And my friends had a bet of like, will it just return red hats? I bet you anything it's just going to return red hats. So that moment where I actually managed to upload a photo, got that feedback, and I could basically go to my friends, ha, I did it. That was probably the best kind of moment at the beginning. And to be honest, I still get a buzz out of prototyping. Like, I'm a CEO who should have extracted myself from tech by now, because I am the CEO, I'm not the CTO. But there's nothing I love more than sitting down with the team, getting out a notebook, drawing stuff on the wall, and kind of that thrill of prototyping it never goes away. So I'm very lucky that I've managed to keep hold of that.
You get the maker badge then.
Definitely.
On the same note, the question now from everyone is, what was the most challenging thing you had to deal with during the process of building your business?
I'd say raising money, by quite a long way actually, because I don't know who's on the call and who's thinking about starting a business, but it's quite hard when you don't meet a stereotype of a startup founder. So to use me, I look younger than I am. I'm 33, but I don't know, I'm beginning to go grey, so people might believe it at some point, but I look like a 12-year-old, it's fine, but it's not so useful when it comes to raising money. I'm a female, which, all the stats on being female funded. It is a thing. I like to think it's not, but it does hold you back. And I'm quite softly spoken and introverted, so I'm not the kind of person who works a room and kind of, I can give a great presentation, I can give a good alter ego, but when it comes to work your room, I absolutely hate it. So I think for me, kind of raising funding was difficult. And also it's very hard not to take it personally when you get hit with comments like, oh, I love your business, I love the product, but you're not the kind of person I normally back. And you're like, ouch, that's hard. So I'd say fundraising for that reason, and just kind of making sure you keep a thick skin is something that I've kind of learned over the years. But it's fun though. You can't complain too much, right?
Okay. uh, but again, slightly related, and this time from Rita. Two big questions, actually, if you don't mind. And I'm cautious of time, Jenny. So if you don't mind, we'll probably take a few more questions.
Yeah, sure. No
A
worries.
lot of questions in the inbox, but we will try to condense everything as much as we can. But this one is the first question is, how would you validate a physical product now that we are in the middle of a pandemic? So that's a very
True.
good question. And the second question is, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your 20 years old self?
Okay. Right. So validating the physical product in a pandemic.
Hmm.
If you've got a bubble, I'd say go to your support bubble first, or people that you live with, anyone that you're physically close to, I guess. Even if they're not your target market, I think that they'll be imaginative enough to put themselves in someone else's shoes. So I'd start there if you need to do something physical. And then I hate myself for saying this, but Zoom is probably the way forward. I know that we're all living on Zoom, but I reckon if you're passionate enough about the product and you're able to kind of hold it up and manipulate it and show people, once again, if you go to people that you know will have a bit of imagination, that will be able to kind of take that leap of faith with you, I think that's probably the only way to do it at the moment. But yeah, I think just be a bit more creative with the people that you're approaching, and maybe give them a bit more of a background context and kind of what you're looking to achieve. So kind of backing out on what I said earlier about not wanting to influence the user group too much. It might be a case that you need to kind of give them a bit more prompting to get the information that you need, rather than just getting that initial kind of gut reaction. And what I wish I could tell myself, I go back in time, I think I'd say be less hesitant about starting a business. I'm a horribly low risk person, which is ridiculous given my career choice now. But I wanted to know everything was in place before I did it. And I wanted to I was graduating in a big recession, which is probably going to be the same for you guys, to be honest. So you get a lot of press kind of going, X, Y, and Z generation is going to have problems doing X, Y, and Z. So it's going to be impossible for Jenny to get a job when she graduates because of the job market. I listened a bit too much to the negativity in the press, and I didn't really back myself enough. So I'd say if I was starting again, just go for it and don't second guess every decision.
Take more risks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gamble more, like you said. Okay, now a question from Diana, and thank you, Diana, for your question. You said that things, of course, are different now in 2020 from the time when you started. Anything in particular that you would like to comment on, maybe in the tech industry, how much
Yeah.
technology itself has evolved?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. There are fields now that are kind of commonplace slash slightly too talked about, that didn't exist kind of back in the day. So a good example actually is what I do is it's AI. I can't actually say I'm an AI company now to an investor because they roll their eyes and they're like, oh, another one. So I think that markets have moved on hugely. So there's opportunities and there's challenges in that. So for you guys, if you're moving into a market that's kind of seen as perceived as established, like AI, like blockchain, where people are talking about it, but it's actually not established from a kind of business model point of view. So like all the startups talk about AI, all the investors are investing in AI. How many people are actually buying AI? Interesting. Same with blockchain, same with, like, we can give loads of examples. So I think that is a very specific challenge to this kind of time period, is there's been a lot of hype and it's now about delivering on it. So there's a lot to be said about proving out your product probably a bit more than you would have had to do in the past. Like I probably couldn't raise a round of funding now with what I raised a round of funding out back in the day, because me going, hey, this is what's under the hood, are you interested? I don't think would resonate nowadays. I think you need to be a bit further along down the line in those markets specifically. I'd say it's easier though to get going on prototyping if you don't code. There's a lot of teach yourself to code courses, etc., etc. I always feel like I'm doing my degree a disservice when I talk about them because I spent 4 years doing it. There's a lot to be said for computer science degrees, but it is easier to get up and running and to teach yourself. And there are a lot of tools that are there to help you kind of be good enough at doing X, Y, and Z to get on the journey. So yeah, I'd say the resources are better as well. So you can probably do more for less money nowadays. So I know it probably doesn't feel like it at this precise moment in time with the world the way it is, but I do think that we're living in quite an exciting age in technology where you're able to produce a lot with not a lot of money. And when you're a startup, that's everything you're looking for.
I totally agree, given how much information we have access to these
Yeah,
days.
exactly. Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you. Time for maybe three last questions, so,
Yeah,
and we
sure.
can wrap it up. So this one is more for about advice for deep tech companies on building prototypes. So what would be your advice on these deep tech companies that are building a prototype that is heavily research-based products?
Yeah. So that was kind of the problem that I had. And to be honest, my prototype took me 9 months and I coded it. So it's a slightly horrible answer, but it's if you're doing something super, super deep tech, you've just got to build it. There were obviously milestones along that journey. So it wasn't as simple as lock myself in a room for 9 months and kind of see what comes out the other side. So you have kind of mini rapid prototyping within there. So I'd say kind of everything you probably know, look at the project, try and break it down into smaller chunks, have moments in that way you can validate it. I appreciate it's really hard to get user feedback when you're doing something so deep tech because there's not that many people that you can talk to. But I'd say try and build yourself a kind of informal advisory board with people that you trust, that you know that you can share information with. I was very lucky. I had my lecturers that I could bounce things off and they would nick my ideas basically. So yeah, try and find yourself a trusted sounding board just to make sure that you're not going down a rabbit hole. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're raising investment as well, investors know if you say the word deep tech, they think long, expensive, hard. Is basically how they think about deep tech companies, or what I've seen, definitely. So it's an exciting space. They know there's a lot of opportunity in it, but they're expecting a lot of cost to be loaded up front. So I'd say if you are deep tech and you're raising money, be honest about the fact you're deep tech, because you're looking for an investor who is in it for the long haul, who understands that you're going to have moments where you can't physically deliver something or something turns out to be impossible, so you need to pivot. So don't go for the quick wins. I'd say kind of try and plan out your journey as much as you can.
Makes total sense. So, second before last question, this is more on recommendations. Is there any book, movie, YouTube channel, video, app that you can recommend to our audience they can try on prototyping and entrepreneurship in general?
Yeah, definitely. So entrepreneurship in general, such a cliche, but The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz is amazing. I wish I had read it at the beginning because
About hard things.
yeah, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And it is the only book I've read where it perfectly encapsulates that feeling of feeling like you're about to drop off a cliff edge because you don't know what you're doing and you can't talk to anyone about it and everything feels like it's falling to bits. And I feel like I'm putting people off. It's honestly, I couldn't wish for a better career path and I love what I do. But being a founder is really lonely and you're solving a lot of things and everything feels like it's in your own head and there's things you can't tell people and it feels like you're going through it alone. So that book is the first book I've read where I've kind of gone, oh my God, thousands of people have been through this. It's not just me. I'm not alone. This is completely normal. So I'd say anyone starting a company needs to read that book. On prototyping, I haven't ever read anything on it that I've really enjoyed, which sounds really bad.
We maybe just stick to this seminar.
Yeah,
Be available.
it's awesome, right?
Exactly, exactly. Jenny, one last question from our audience, slightly completely different from everything that we ask you. So, what is it like to get an MBE?
Oh man.
And congratulations. I should have mentioned that in the introduction.
No worries. It's really weird, to be honest. So once again, a story that I'm probably way oversharing, but for some reason, so you don't know that you've been nominated, you don't know that it's going to happen, and the government gets your address from somewhere. Don't ask me. So because I was moving around so much because I was renting, the government had my parents' address. So I had my mum on the phone and I was in Primark buying an umbrella because I just got absolutely drenched. And she went, oh, there's a letter for you. Do you want me to open it? I was like, yeah, sure, sounds great. And she went, oh, well, someone's got the wrong address. And I was like, why do you say that? And they're like, oh, there's something about someone being awarded an MBE. And I was like, oh, wow, okay.
Wow.
And then my mum carried on reading the letter and she was like, oh my God, it's you. I was like, okay. So I had the weirdest finding out experience probably ever of being in Primark buying an umbrella. My mum saying it probably didn't belong to me. But yeah, it was
Probably because your app said that your mother was an apple. Have you ever?
yeah, probably. It's I'm not doing my mum any justice on this call. She does love me and my business. But yeah, it's a very, very weird feeling. I'm incredibly humbled, to be honest, by everything that I've had the pleasure of experiencing with Snap, because like I say, I did this because I had an idea that I couldn't really get out of my system, and I didn't ever think anything would ever come of it. And to be on weird Forbes lists and getting MBEs and stuff, it's definitely something that can kind of only happen to you when you start a company. It's a crazy ride, and I try not to think about it.
Yeah, a lot of people call it the emotional roller coaster of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Entrepreneur, but truly deserved. And Jenny, thank you once again for your presentation, for your time today, and thank you, of course, to the people that attended today to the session. Those of you that asked the questions, also thank you very much. I do hope to see you all next week for our next startup seminars. It won't be me hosting this time; it will be Alex Alkins, my line manager. So I hope to see you all next week or the week after. And Jenny, once again, thank you so much for your time. It has
Oh, no
been
worries.
absolutely pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me.
Everyone, have a good evening and see you soon for another startup seminar. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.